Dawn breaks on a cold October morning in 1415. Near the village of Agincourt in northern France, thousands of French knights and men-at-arms stand proud in their shining armour. They outnumber the English invaders by several times and are confident of a crushing victory. As the morning mist lifts, the French vanguard advances across a muddy field constricted by woodland. The ground, freshly ploughed and soaked by autumn rains, quickly becomes a quagmire. French knights struggle forward, sinking to their ankles in mud, their heavy plate armour turning each step into a labour. From across the field comes a silence. The English are eerily still, arranged in a tight line behind sharpened stakes. Suddenly, a dark cloud arcs through the sky, thousands of English arrows released in unison. The hail of arrows slams into the advancing French. Horses rear and scream, knights raise shields to little avail. In the narrow killing ground, the French advance falters. Mounted men-at-arms, desperate to break the bowmen, spur forward but only churn the mud further. More waves of French warriors press from behind, and soon the foremost ranks are mired and bunched together. English longbowmen, firing at point-blank range, rain arrows down without mercy. Gaps in French armour are pierced. Noblemen fall face first into the mud, never to rise. Amid the chaos, the English King Henry V gives the order and his dismounted men-at-arms surge forward. They wield swords, axes and mallets, slaughtering exhausted French knights trapped in the mire. By midday, the once proud French host is utterly broken. The Battle of Agincourt ends in a disaster for France. When the carnage finally ceases, some 6,000 French soldiers lie dead on the field. An entire generation of French nobility cut down in a single morning. 3 dukes, 9 counts and countless barons and knights have been slain or captured. The Constable of France, the commander-in-chief of the army, is dead. Men who had been the backbone of France's chivalry, seasoned generals, wealthy lords, even royal princes, now litter the bloody ground. Chroniclers remark that the list of the fallen reads like a roll call of France's greatest families. In contrast, English losses are minimal. King Henry V surveys the field littered with French banners and broken lances, astonished at the scale of his triumph. For France, the outcome is more than a defeat in battle. It is a national catastrophe. News of Agincourt travels swiftly, and when it reaches Paris, shock and despair grip the court of the mad king Charles VI. How could the mighty French knighthood, on home soil and so superior in numbers, be brought so low? The realm slips into panic. In the streets and taverns, commoners whisper that God has punished the pride of the French nobles. The very confidence and feudal bravado that led the knights to charge have brought about ruin. The Kingdom of France, already strained by internal conflicts, now faces a crisis of survival. Civil war and collapse, 1415 to 1422, Agincourt's aftermath, leaves France not only militarily crippled but also politically fractured. The realm was already divided by a bitter feud between 2 factions, the Armagnacs and the Burgundians, and now that rift explodes into open civil war. The Armagnacs, supporters of the royal prince, the Dauphin Charles, and the Duke of Orleans, had led the French army at Agincourt and paid the price in blood. In the days after the battle, they become the scapegoats for the defeat. Sensing opportunity, their rivals, the Burgundian faction led by Duke John the Fearless of Burgundy, move swiftly. Within days of Agincourt, John the Fearless musters his troops and marches on Paris. The capital, already destabilized by news of the defeat, is betrayed from within. Burgundian partisans fling open the city gates. Paris falls under Burgundian control, and Count Bernard of Armagnac, the Armagnac leader, and his men are butchered in a bloody coup. The Dauphin, young Charles, barely escapes Paris alive and flees south. France's tragedy is compounded by fratricide. Instead of uniting against the English threat, the French are tearing each other apart. In the following years, the civil conflict only worsens. King Charles VI, mentally ill and unable to rule, is a pawn in the hands of whoever controls Paris. Duke John of Burgundy, hungry for power, seeks to legitimize his hold by allying with the victorious English. In 1419, an attempt at reconciliation goes horribly awry. John the Fearless meets the Dauphin Charles on the bridge at Montereau under the pretext of negotiations. There, Armagnac loyalists in the Dauphin's entourage assassinate the Burgundian duke in revenge for earlier crimes. The murder shocks the nation and hardens the Burgundians' resolve. John's son, Philip the Good, swears vengeance and turns wholeheartedly to the English side. Any hope of French unity against the invaders dies on that bridge at Montereau. By 1420, France's divisiveness is sealed in a humiliating treaty. Under Burgundian pressure, the French Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, Charles VI's estranged wife, cooperates with King Henry V of England to sign the Treaty of Troyes. This agreement recognizes Henry V as the heir to the French throne, disinheriting the Dauphin Charles. In a grand ceremony, Henry V marries Princess Catherine of France, forging a personal union meant to cement English rule. The dual monarchy seems within reach. When the ailing Charles VI dies, Henry and Catherine's offspring will rule both England and France. In effect, France is to be absorbed into an Anglo-Burgundian empire. The treaty is a staggering blow to French sovereignty. The Dauphin Charles, now declared illegitimate and a traitor by his own mother's faction, is mocked as the Little King of Bourges, a reference to the remote town of Bourges where he holds his exiled court. At 20 years old, Charles finds himself virtually king without a kingdom, clinging to the loyalty of southern France while enemy forces occupy the north. Even as politics play out, the military situation continues to deteriorate. King Henry V resumes his campaigns, unopposed by a divided France. From 1417 to 1419, English armies methodically conquer Normandy, the rich duchy in the north. With Burgundian allies securing Paris in the east, Henry picks off French strongholds one by one. The great city of Rouen, capital of Normandy, falls after a long siege, a bitter symbol of French impotence. By 1422, English power in France is at its height. Yet fate intervenes. King Henry V, the architect of England's victories, dies suddenly in August 1422, likely of dysentery. He is just 35 and at the pinnacle of his conquests. In a twist of fate, the feeble King Charles VI of France dies only 2 months later. According to the Treaty of Troyes, the crowns of France and England now both pass to Henry's infant son, not yet a year old, Henry VI. A baby, incapable of holding a sword or wearing a crown, has theoretically become king of 2 realms. In practical terms, governance falls to Henry V's brother, John, Duke of Bedford, who acts as regent in France. Bedford is an able commander and quickly moves to preserve England's gains. The dual monarchy exists only on parchment and in propaganda. In reality, France is split in 3. The English and their Burgundian allies rule the north, including Paris. The Dauphin Charles tenuously rules the south, often called the Kingdom of Bourges, and between them lie ruined lands racked by lawlessness. The dream of an English France seems closer than ever, while the French Valois cause appears on the verge of collapse. The boy king Charles VII and a broken army, 1422 to 1429. In late 1422, the disinherited Dauphin declares himself King Charles VII of France. It is a hollow title in the eyes of many. At 19 years old, Charles VII has not even been crowned. Reims, the traditional coronation city, lies deep in enemy territory. He controls only the central and southern provinces, far from the heart of the kingdom, and he lacks the resources of the rich north. The French people, exhausted by war and pillaged by mercenaries, call him derisively Le Petit Roi de Bourges, the Little King of Bourges. Charles' court at Bourges and Chinon is a shabby shadow of the splendid court Paris once hosted. Uncrowned, underfunded, and unproven, the young monarch faces a nearly impossible task: to rally a shattered nation and eject the invaders. Charles VII's early reign is marked by indecision and the overbearing influence of favourites and advisers. Racked with doubt and surrounded by scheming courtiers, he struggles to direct the war. The French military, once comprised of proud feudal levies led by great lords, is now in tatters. Many of the kingdom's finest knights perished or were captured at Agincourt in subsequent battles. Those nobles who remain loyal often pursue their own agendas or feud among themselves. What forces Charles can muster are largely ad hoc assemblies of local levies, opportunistic mercenaries, and the crucial but small contingents of Scottish allies who have arrived to honour the Auld Alliance between France and Scotland. French war strategy at this time is mostly defensive and desperate, holding the line south of the Loire River, trying to keep the English from pushing further into the heart of France. Castles and towns along the Loire become vital barriers. Meanwhile, roaming bands of unemployed soldiers turned bandits, écorcheurs or flayers, as the suffering peasants call them, spread chaos. The French king nominally commands these soldiers of fortune, but in practice he can barely control them. For ordinary villagers, it is hard to tell friend from foe. An English soldier may burn your home, but a French mercenary might do the same if he's unpaid. Law and order are breaking down as the war drags on. In 1424, Charles VII risks a bold attempt to turn the tide. A large French and Scottish allied army advances north, seeking a decisive battle against the English. At Verneuil in Normandy, they meet the forces of King Henry's regent, the Duke of Bedford. What unfolds is later called a Second Agincourt. The French, again employing traditional tactics of armoured charges, clash with the English in a pitched battle on August 17, 1424. Initially, 2,000 elite Milanese cavalry, hired from Italy, thunder through English archers and nearly rout one flank of Bedford's army. But elsewhere on the field, discipline and coordination falter. English longbowmen and men-at-arms stand firm. In a brutal melee lasting barely an hour, Bedford achieves a complete victory. The French-Scottish host is annihilated. Estimates put their dead around 6,000, rivaling the butcher's bill of Agincourt. Among the fallen are the Scottish commanders and many French nobles, including the Duke of Alençon and famed knights. The Scots forces, who had been a backbone of Charles's resistance, are virtually wiped out as an effective fighting force. King Charles's army has been broken yet again. After Verneuil, any immediate hope of dislodging the English from northern France vanishes. The young Charles VII falls into despair. According to chronicle accounts, he becomes withdrawn, heavily influenced by whichever favourite flatters him most at court. It seems that every gamble the French take ends in disaster. By the late 1420s, the military situation is dire. The English occupy Normandy and much of the Paris region. Burgundy is hostile, and even the Loire River line seems likely to crack under pressure. Yet, even in these bleak times, some seeds of recovery are quietly being sown. One bright spot for Charles VII is the presence of a hard-bitten veteran leader, Arthur de Richemont. Richemont, a Breton nobleman and seasoned warrior who had actually fought and been captured at Agincourt, returns to Charles' side in the mid-1420s. In 1425, backed by influential allies, notably Yolande of Aragon, Charles's formidable mother-in-law, Arthur de Richemont is appointed Constable of France, the kingdom's highest military commander. Richemont is a man of blunt manners and iron determination. He immediately sees that France's military must be rebuilt from the ground up. He advocates for strict discipline, better organisation, and an aggressive prosecution of the war. However, his efforts initially meet resistance at Charles's court. The king's inner circle includes powerful favourites like Georges de la Trémoille, men more interested in personal power and petty intrigue than reform. These courtiers whisper that Richemont is too arrogant, too uncompromising. At one point, tensions run so high that Richemont is actually banished from court and his constable's salary withheld. The feud between Richemont and La Trémoille hampers French efforts. The very leaders who should be uniting against England are at odds. As a result, through the late 1420s, meaningful reform stagnates. The French armies in the field remain a patchwork of feudal levies and mercenaries, only intermittently effective. By 1428, a sense of impending doom grips France. English forces, now under the command of Thomas Montague, Earl of Salisbury, and later William de la Pole, Earl of Suffolk, push south toward the Loire. Their goal is the city of Orléans, the last major stronghold blocking an invasion of the rich Loire Valley and beyond. In the autumn of 1428, the English lay siege to Orléans. If Orléans falls, the road to the south, to Bourges, to Charles VII's refuge, will lie open. The beleaguered French king seems powerless to prevent this. Morale is at rock bottom. Many of Charles's advisors even suggest fleeing further south or into exile. It is in this desperate hour that an unexpected savior arrives, a figure who will fundamentally change the momentum of the war, a young peasant woman from Lorraine claiming to be sent by God. Joan of Arc's divine mission, 1429. In the winter of 1429, rumours spread of a miraculous maiden rallying support for the king. Joan of Arc, a 17-year-old peasant girl from Domremy, makes her way to Charles VII's court at Chinon. She claims to hear the voices of saints commanding her to save France and ensure Charles is crowned king. Initially dismissed by nobles and clergy as a naive girl or worse, Joan's fervour and confidence slowly win people over. After a test of her sincerity, and perhaps out of sheer desperation, Charles VII permits Joan to accompany a relief force headed for the siege of Orléans. In March 1429, the diminutive teenage girl in white armour rides at the head of an army, carrying a banner emblazoned with God's name. Hardened soldiers, demoralised by years of defeat, find themselves inexplicably inspired by this unlikely leader. She speaks of divine destiny, of driving out the goddams, a common slang for the English after their frequent oath, and ending the misery of war. To a people who have seen their nobles fail them, Joan seems a gift from heaven. Joan of Arc enters the besieged city of Orléans in April 1429 to a hero's welcome. Her mere presence electrifies the defenders. Wasting no time, she urges immediate action. In a series of bold assaults over the next few days, the French attack the English siege positions. Joan, though lacking formal military training, proves fearless on the battlefield. Clad in shining armour and carrying her banner, she stands in the thick of arrows and gunfire, urging men forward. The French captains, seasoned knights like La Hire, Jean de Dunois, the bastard of Orléans, and Étienne de Vignoles, find new courage and coordination under Joan's inspirational leadership. One by one, the English forts, Bastille, surrounding Orléans, fall to French attacks. On May 7, 1429, Joan personally leads an assault on Les Tourelles, a heavily fortified English strongpoint controlling the river bridge. She is wounded by an arrow, but returns to the fight, rallying the troops. By the next day, the English besiegers, battered and demoralised, abandon the siege. Orléans is saved. This astonishing victory, the first major French triumph in years, reverberates across the country. To the French people, it seems nothing short of a miracle. Joan of Arc becomes known as the Maid of Orléans, and her name is spoken alongside prayers of thanksgiving. With the momentum suddenly shifting, Joan presses Charles VII to capitalise on the moment. She insists that the ultimate goal is not just military victory, but the sacring of Charles as the rightful, God-anointed King of France. Despite some cautious counsellors advising against risky moves, Joan's conviction prevails. In June 1429, she accompanies the French army in a bold offensive in the Loire Valley, clearing remaining English positions that block the path to the north. In quick succession, the French win battles at Jargeau, Meung-sur-Loire, and Beaugency, capturing English-held bridges and towns. Perhaps the most dramatic clash comes at Patay on June 18, 1429. There, a fleeing English force under Sir John Fastolfe and Lord Talbot is overtaken by French advance units. The English longbowmen, caught in the open and unable to prepare their usual defensive stakes in time, are charged by French cavalry led by La Hire and Jean de Xaintrailles. The result is a complete rout. English archers are ridden down and an entire English detachment is destroyed. For once, the French knights had learned from past failures. At Patay, the English were unprepared and overwhelmed, suffering a defeat as crushing, for them, as Agincourt had been for France. Lord Talbot is captured, and English morale is shaken. The myth of English invincibility, so long unchallenged since Agincourt, is shattered by one swift French charge. Now Joan of Arc leads Charles VII's forces toward Reims, the hallowed city of Coronation deep in Champagne territory. Many towns along the route, inspired by the string of French victories or fearful of the Maid's reputation, open their gates to the king's army. Even Troyes, the very city where the infamous treaty was signed, surrenders without a fight. At last, the royal army enters Reims, and on July 17, 1429, a magnificent ceremony takes place in Reims Cathedral. Charles, guided by Joan, is anointed with holy oil from the sacred ampulla and crowned King of France in the ancient tradition of his ancestors. Joan of Arc, banner in hand, kneels at the king's feet with tears of joy, proclaiming, "God's will is done." This coronation is far more than a formality. It is a profound political and spiritual victory. It legitimizes Charles VII beyond any doubt in the eyes of many French, erasing the stain of disinheritance from the Treaty of Troyes. For the first time in decades, France has a crowned Valois king recognized in a major cathedral. The common folk who hear of it rejoice, seeing it as divine vindication. The English, by contrast, had crowned their young Henry VI in Paris earlier, but that ceremony lacked the gravitas of Reims. Joan of Arc had, in a matter of months, reversed the momentum of the war. Though Joan's personal saga does not end happily, she will be captured by Burgundian soldiers in May 1430, sold to the English, and tragically executed for heresy in 1431. Her impact is enduring. She ignites a new spirit of French nationalism and faith in ultimate victory. French soldiers who once believed themselves cursed now have confidence that God favours their cause. While English commanders dismiss Joan's victories as luck or label her a witch, they cannot deny the shift in the strategic balance. After 1429, the English find it harder to advance. They are increasingly on the defensive, garrisoning what they hold rather than boldly striking into the French heartland. Joan of Arc's brief military career thus marks the turning of the tide. The war is far from over, but France has been given a priceless gift: hope. Struggling toward unity, 1430 to 1435. In the early 1430s, the conflict grinds on, but under the surface, France is changing. The inspiration of Joan of Arc has galvanized the French, yet major parts of the country remain under foreign domination or hostile control. English troops still occupy Normandy and many northern towns. The Burgundian Duke, Philip the Good, continues to hold a vast swath of eastern France and maintains an alliance with England, although that alliance has been strained by Joan's victories and by political considerations. King Charles VII, now legitimately crowned, slowly grows into his kingship. No longer the boy king, by 1430 he is a man in his late 20s. The traumas of the past, defeat, exile, and Joan's martyrdom, forge in him a newfound determination. He sheds some of his earlier lethargy and surrounds himself with a cohort of more competent advisors. Importantly, Arthur de Richemont re-enters the stage decisively. After the triumph at Reims, Richemont's value is recognized. He had even participated unofficially in some of Joan's campaigns. Though earlier banished, he famously appeared with reinforcements at the Battle of Patay, just after the English rout began. In 1432 to 1433, a palace coup unfolds. Charles's troublesome favourite, Georges de la Trémoille, who had kept Richemont at bay, is overthrown and removed from power. Some of Charles's loyalists, possibly with Richemont's backing, physically expel La Trémoille from court. With this obstruction gone, the king and his constable can finally work in concert. It is a pivotal turning point within the French leadership. Now Charles VII and Richemont pursue a strategy to secure internal unity as a prerequisite for final victory. Diplomatic feelers reach out to Burgundy, whose leader, Philip the Good, has grown wary of endless war. The English cause has lost its lustre after a decade of grinding occupation, and the death of the Duke of Bedford in 1435, the able English regent who had held the alliance together, leaves the English without strong leadership in France. Sensing an opening, King Charles negotiates with Philip. Through patient diplomacy and a willingness to make concessions, including a formal apology for the murder of Philip's father, John the Fearless, and offering lands and money, Charles VII achieves what once seemed unthinkable. In September 1435, the Treaty of Arras is signed. Philip the Good of Burgundy agrees to withdraw from his English alliance and recognize Charles VII as the rightful king of France. In exchange, Charles grants Philip substantial territories and privileges, effectively giving Burgundy near autonomy but securing its neutrality or support. The Armagnac-Burgundian civil war that had torn France apart for a generation finally ends. The significance of this reconciliation can hardly be overstated. France is politically unified under Charles's authority, at least in name. While Burgundy itself remains separate in practice, it will no longer aid the English. Suddenly, the English in France find themselves isolated, with no major French ally. The strategic equation has tilted firmly toward the Valois. Almost immediately, the effects of unity are felt on the battlefield. In 1435, even before the treaty is official, French forces besiege the remaining English garrisons with renewed vigour. The very month Arras is signed, the English suffer a blow. Their commander, the Earl of Arundel, is defeated and killed at the Battle of Gerberoy by a French force. which some sources say even included Scots and a young Scottish mercenary leader. In 1436, Paris, the grand prize, returns to French hands. The citizens of Paris, weary of foreign rule and encouraged by the détente between the king and Burgundy, stage an uprising against the English occupiers. As Burgundian forces quietly withdraw from the city, Charles VII's troops under Constable Richemont and the Bastard of Orléans enter Paris. The gates open to them in April 1436. After 16 years under Burgundian English control, the capital welcomes King Charles back, even if Charles himself only makes a ceremonial entry later for safety. The sight of the fleur-de-lis flag flying once again over Paris sends waves of joy through loyalist areas of France. It is a powerful symbol. The usurpers are being driven out at last. Yet even with Paris and unity secured, the 100 Years' War is not over. Truces come and go. Low-level skirmishing continues. The English still hold Normandy, a rich province they consider theirs, and Gascony in the distant southwest, the land of Bordeaux and fine wines that England has possessed for centuries. To expel the English fully, Charles VII needs not just unity, but an army capable of finishing the job. And while Joan of Arc's legacy endures in spirit, the French military still needs sweeping reform to become truly effective. Through the late 1430s, Charles and Richemont turn their attention to this internal transformation. They realize that victory in modern war will not come from feudal levies alone or momentary zeal, but from disciplined, well-equipped forces and solid logistics. The French crown begins to take unprecedented steps to centralize and professionalize its military, steps that will revolutionize medieval warfare and lay the foundation for France's emergence as the strongest power in Europe. Before those reforms can fully take shape, Charles has to overcome one more challenge from within. In 1440, a coalition of high nobles, dissatisfied with the growing royal authority and fearing their own eclipse, rises in rebellion against Charles VII. This uprising, known as the Praguerie, sees even the king's own son, the future Louis XI, and some leading aristocrats plot to overthrow or control Charles. They resent the king's new policies and his low-born advisors, such as the talented merchant Jacques Coeur, who is helping restore the royal finances. But Charles VII, seasoned by adversity, acts decisively. With support from Richemont and loyal forces, he defeats the rebels and pardons his errant son. The failure of the Praguerie in 1440 is significant. It marks the last serious feudal revolt during Charles's reign. The great princes are put on notice that the era of private wars and king-making is ending. Charles VII is now firmly in command of his realm, free to enforce reforms without internal sabotage. Reforming the army, 1435 to 1445. From feudal levy to standing force. With political unity largely secured and the realm pacified, Charles VII and Arthur de Richemont embark on a comprehensive overhaul of the French military. They intend to turn the loose feudal levies and mercenary bands into a modern army by the standards of the 15th century, one that can consistently outperform the English in battle. The lessons learned through hard experience are clear. First, financial reform must underpin any military reform. An army cannot function if it cannot be paid and supplied. Charles VII addresses this by tackling the very way France funds war. In earlier times, French kings had to convene the États Généraux, the Estates General Assembly, to request special taxes during emergencies. These taxes were temporary and often insufficient, leading to shortages and late pay for troops, hence pillaging. Charles and his advisors persuasively argue that the ongoing national emergency, driving out the invader, requires a steady, reliable income. Over the years following 1435, the Crown convinces provincial estates and assemblies to make certain taxes permanent. Notably, the taille, a land tax, becomes a regular annual tax rather than an occasional levy. Additionally, the gabelle, salt tax, and other duties are enforced to fill the royal coffers. By the mid-1445s, Charles VII enjoys far greater financial resources than his predecessors ever did during the war. This money is earmarked to maintain troops year-round, whether in active campaign or not. Equipped with a steady revenue, the king and the constable introduce landmark military reforms. In 1445, Charles VII promulgates what is known as the Grande Ordonnance, Great Ordinance, of Luppy-le-Château. This royal edict essentially creates the framework for a permanent standing army, arguably the first of its kind in medieval Western Europe since the days of the Roman legions. The ordnance establishes 15 companies of ordnance, compagnies d'ordonnance, at the king's exclusive service. Each company is a cavalry unit led by a trusted captain, often a noble of proven skill and loyalty. The ordinance stipulates that each company will field 100 lances. A lance is not merely a single man with a spear. It is a tactical unit consisting of several men grouped around a man-at-arms. Typically, under Charles's system, one lance includes a heavy armoured cavalryman, gendarme, one or two mounted archers, often using bows or crossbows, a coutelier, light swordsman or squire, and support staff, such as a page and a servant to hold horses. In total, a lance might have 4 to 6 men, combatants and non-combatants. By multiplying this structure, each company of 100 lances puts roughly 600 combat-ready soldiers into the field, about a third of them armoured men-at-arms and the rest lighter troops. Across 15 companies, this creates a core army of around 9,000 professional troops. Crucially, these soldiers are paid regular wages by the crown, in both war and peace. They swear loyalty directly to King Charles VII, not to local lords. This is a radical shift. No longer will the French king be wholly dependent on feudal levies who serve only for a season and then go home or desert. Now, he has a permanent cadre of troops at his disposal all year, forming the nucleus of field armies and garrisons. Arthur de Richemont, as constable, rigorously enforces the new structure. He handpicks many of the captains for their merit and birth. Men like the veteran captains La Hire and Poton de Saint-Traille become company commanders. Discipline is tightened across the board. Richemont is famously stern. He does not hesitate to punish theft, indiscipline, or abuse of civilians. The king backs him in this, aware that the loyalty of the population depends on curbing the excesses of soldiers. Royal ordinances at this time impose strict rules of conduct on the companies. A noteworthy subset of the ordinance is the Petite Ordonnance, which outlines the concept of morts pays. These are reduced-strength lances, with perhaps 3 to 4 men, assigned to garrison key fortresses during peacetime, ensuring that even fort guards are standardized and paid. The creation of the standing companies also conveniently absorbs many of the mercenaries who had plagued France. The men willing to serve now have a place in the royal army, and those who refuse can be treated as outlaws. By offering regular pay, Charles VII reduces the incentive for soldiers to live off plunder. As the new army takes shape, French villages and towns begin to feel some relief. The king's troops are gradually becoming protectors rather than predators. Besides the elite cavalry companies, Charles VII recognizes the need for a strong infantry component, particularly missile troops, something France had long neglected. To complement the mounted gendarmes, in 1448 the king establishes the Frank archers. This system calls for each parish, local community, to select and equip one able-bodied archer for the king's service. In exchange for being ready to fight when called, these archers are exempt from certain taxes, hence franc meaning free. While not a full-time standing force like the companies of ordnance, the Frank archers form a kind of militia reserve. They train on holidays and can be mustered in large numbers if needed, providing a pool of semi-trained infantry. Importantly, it signals a shift in attitude. The French crown is now cultivating commoners as soldiers, especially archers, whereas earlier French armies had relied almost entirely on noble cavalry or hired foreign bowmen. By giving peasants an incentive, tax freedom, to train with the bow, Charles VII is effectively trying to nurture his own version of the English longbowman. These Frank archers will later prove useful in campaigns, though their quality varies. What matters is that France now possesses a balanced force. Heavy cavalry, light cavalry, foot archers and other infantry, all under more centralized control. Alongside these structural changes, tactics and training improve. French commanders increasingly study the successes and failures of prior battles. The arrogance that led knights to charge recklessly at English longbows is slowly tempered by a recognition of combined arms tactics. For example, French gendarmes are drilled to cooperate with infantry support, not to outrun them. There is a greater willingness to fight on foot when appropriate, a lesson partly learned from the Scots, who often dismounted to fight. The new companies regularly practice manoeuvres and weapon skills. Some chroniclers note that the French men-at-arms of the 1440s are much better disciplined than their predecessors. Many knights by now have fought alongside or against the English for years and have adapted some of the English tactics as well. Crucially, Charles VII's reformed army is backed by improved administration. Men like the king's minister Jacques Coeur rebuild royal finances to feed and arm the troops. The king's treasurers and provosts ensure wages are paid, not always perfectly on time, but far more reliably than before. The supply lines are organised so that large formations can keep the field without dissolving. Logistics, often the bane of medieval armies, become a focus. All of these changes transform the French military from a feudal mob that appears only seasonally into a more professional, standing force that can campaign as long as necessary. This new French army, born from the ordinances of the 1440s, is a revolution in warfare. It effectively marks the beginning of the end for the medieval feudal levée en masse and the advent of a national army. France, for the first time, has what could be described as Europe's first modern army. Permanent, centrally funded, disciplined and versatile. The rise of French artillery, 1440s to innovation on the battlefield. While Charles VII and Richemont restructure the cavalry and infantry, another transformation is underway that will give France a cutting-edge advantage: the development of powerful artillery. Gunpowder weapons had been introduced to European battlefields in the 14th century, but early cannon were often crude, inaccurate, and as dangerous to their users as to the enemy. By the early 15th century, cannons were mainly siege weapons, useful for battering castle walls over weeks of bombardment. The French, like other nations, used such bombards sporadically. Famously, the English had even brought small cannon to Agincourt, though with little effect. But in the 1420s and 1430s, significant technological progress occurs. The formulation of gunpowder improves. European alchemists and gunsmiths discover how to refine saltpeter and charcoal mixtures to produce a more potent, explosive force. This new gunpowder burns faster and more consistently, meaning cannon can fire iron balls at higher velocities, greatly increasing their destructive power. Simultaneously, advances in metal casting techniques allow the forging of stronger, more durable cannon barrels. By the late 1430s, cannons are less prone to exploding and can handle larger powder charges. Seizing on these innovations, Charles VII actively recruits skilled artisans and engineers to his cause. Foremost among them are the Bureau brothers, Jean Bureau and his younger brother Gaspard. Originally Parisian lawyers and civil officials, the Bureau brothers turned their mathematical minds to artillery science around 1435. They offer their services to the king, and given Charles's keen interest in artillery, they rise quickly. Jean Bureau is appointed Master of Artillery, sometimes called Master Gunner of France, by the late 1430s. Under their direction, the French Artillery Corps is completely reorganized and expanded. The bureaus standardize calibers for easier supply of shot and powder. They also innovate in the deployment of artillery. They experiment with smaller, more mobile field guns, such as culverins, essentially large handgunners or small cannons, which can be wheeled onto battlefields to support troops, not just left to siege camps. They amass a train of siege guns as well, ensuring that the French can besiege any city and expect results in days or weeks rather than months. The impact of the improved artillery is soon evident. In the late 1430s and early 1440s, as truces come and go, the French use their cannons to recapture towns still held by the English or their allies. For instance, in 1437, just a year after Paris is liberated, French artillery helps blast open the gates of Montereau, a stronghold on the Seine. In 1439, Charles's forces besiege Meaux, a fortress town that had held out for years. The Bureau brothers direct a bombardment that forces Meaux's surrender. Town after town, Saint-Germain-en-Laye, 1440, Pontoise, 1441, falls more quickly thanks to concentrated cannon fire. The presence of artillery also deters would-be rebels. During the Praguery Revolt in 1440, the king's forces, with Bureau's cannons, overawe some rebel-held castles into submission without lengthy fighting. By the mid-1445s, France likely has the best artillery train in Europe. The king spares no expense in maintaining dozens of cannons of various sizes, hundreds of trained gunners, and the logistical tail to keep them supplied. Guns are given names and carefully inventoried. Gunfounders are regarded as valuable royal servants. The results speak for themselves as active campaigning against the English resumes. The Normandy campaign of 1449 to 1450 will vividly demonstrate French artillery supremacy. The Bureau brothers accompany the French army when the truce with England ends, bringing with them a formidable siege train. At Rouen, the chief city of Normandy, French cannons batter the walls and bastions relentlessly in late 1449, convincing the English garrison to surrender relatively swiftly and sparing the city a prolonged siege. Moving west to the Channel coast, the French besiege Harfleur, the same port Henry V captured in 1415, in December 1449. Once again, heavy bombardment accelerates the fall of the town. Honfleur and other coastal forts are similarly reduced by early 1450. In one ingenious feat to capture the port of Cherbourg, the last English bastion in Normandy, Jean Bureau reportedly positions cannon on the shoreline below the high tide mark. At low tide, his teams roll out the guns and bombard the seaward walls. When the tide rises, they withdraw and wait. This tactic confounds the defenders, and the continuous pounding ensures Cherbourg's surrender by the summer of 1450. Not only in sieges, but also on the battlefield, French artillery begins to play a decisive role. The English, though not ignorant of cannons, do not field as many or as effective guns in these years, partly due to cost and partly due to lack of specialists. At first, the idea of bringing cannon onto an open battlefield is novel and risky, but under Jean Bureau's direction, the French prove it can work. The culminating examples will come in 1450 and 1453, but even before that, smaller engagements experiment with artillery support. French commanders learn to protect their guns with infantry and stakes to prevent enemy charges from capturing them. After early mistakes, the psychological impact of these thunderbombs is also significant. Many English soldiers, used to the duel of longbow and knight, find the loud blasts and sudden destruction caused by cannonballs deeply unsettling. By 1450, the stage is set. France possesses a reforged army, the most advanced military machine of medieval Europe. Well-paid professional men-at-arms stand ready year-round. Commoner archers and foot soldiers augment the nobles, bringing balance to the ranks, and formidable artillery, mobile, powerful, and expertly managed, gives the French a technological edge unseen in earlier phases of the war. All of this has been achieved by King Charles VII and his commanders in the span of a mere decade after years of devastation. Now, that machine is about to be unleashed to achieve what previous generations could not, the complete ouster of the English from French soil. Normandy Reconquered, 1449 to 1450. In the summer of 1449, after a period of uneasy truce, war between France and England resumes in full fury. The truce had been intended to buy time for negotiations, and indeed Charles VII had used it to build his new army. But a provocative incident shatters the peace. An English garrison captain, acting without clear orders, attacks and loots the Breton town of Fougères in March 1449, a breach of truce that outrages the French and even offends the Duke of Brittany, formerly neutral. Charles VII seizes the excuse. By late summer, he declares the truce over and launches a grand offensive to liberate Normandy, the cradle of William the Conqueror that has been under English occupation for over 3 decades. French forces pour into Normandy from multiple directions. The reformed royal army moves with a confidence and speed that surprises the English. Leading one prong is Arthur de Richemont himself, now also Duke of Brittany. He succeeded his nephew in 1457, but in 1449 he's still the constable, and he leverages Breton support for this campaign. Another prong is led by Charles of Bourbon, Count of Clermont, a young, energetic prince. They coordinate their sieges and advances meticulously. In September 1449, the great city of Rouen, which had been the administrative capital of English Normandy, is invested. Many citizens of Rouen, chafing under foreign rule, secretly favour Charles VII. After a brief siege, and crucially after the French cannons smash some walls, the English agree to surrender Rouen in October. The terms allow the English garrison to withdraw, and Rouen is restored to French rule. The sight of Charles VII's troops marching through Rouen gates under the fleur-de-lis banner is triumphant. It was in Rouen that Joan of Arc was burned in 1431 under English auspices. Now, Rouen is avenged and reclaimed. The collapse of English positions in Normandy rapidly accelerates. Town after town yields. Lisieux, Coutances, Avranches, across Normandy, French forces either besiege and storm the English-held strongholds or compel their surrender through shows of overwhelming force. French companies d'ordonnance proved their effectiveness. Moving in organized units, they overawe local English garrisons that are often short on manpower and morale. Norman peasants and townsfolk provide intelligence and logistical help to the French, no longer seeing them as plundering brigands, but as liberators who pay in coin, thanks to Charles's wages, and enforce discipline. Early 1450 brings the final showdown in Normandy. The English, alarmed by the rapid losses, dispatch reinforcements from across the Channel. Sir Thomas Kyrill leads a force of a few thousand English veterans landing in Cotentin, the western peninsula of Normandy, with the aim to relieve the remaining English garrisons and perhaps rally a counter-offensive. In April 1450, Kyril's army joins with other English contingents and positions itself near the village of Formigny, not far from Bayeux. By now, two French forces are converging on them, one led by the Count of Clermont and another led by Constable Richemont, coming up from Brittany after mopping up the southwest of Normandy. On April 15, 1450, the Battle of Formigny is fought, a decisive engagement that will seal Normandy's fate. At Formigny, the English draw up in a defensive formation, reminiscent of their setups at Crécy or Agincourt, dismounted men-at-arms at the centre and longbowmen on the flanks, with pits and sharpened stakes prepared in front. They hope to repeat past victories by repelling French assaults with clouds of arrows. The French, however, are not the impetuous nobles of 1415. Under Clermont's command, they approach with caution. Initially, a fierce archery duel takes place between English longbowmen and some Genoese crossbowmen on the French side. The French men-at-arms test the English lines, but hesitate to rush into the arrow storm. Then the French employ a new tactic. Field artillery is brought forth. Jean and Gaspard Bureau, present with Clermont's force, position two culverin cannons within range of the English left flank. These small but powerful guns open fire, bombarding the English positions. From a distance, the longbows cannot easily reach. Iron cannonballs smash into the packed ranks of archers, causing chaos and wounding many. The English, realizing they cannot sit idle under this bombardment, decide to act. A detachment of English knights and billmen rush out from their defensive line and charge the French cannons. In the hasty melee, they manage to overrun the gun crews and capture the culverins, silencing the artillery threat for the moment. But this success puts the English out of position just as fresh French forces arrive. Right on cue, Arthur de Richemont's army appears on the field, having marched swiftly from the south. The constable's timing is impeccable. His troops fall upon the English from the flank and rear. With a thunderous crash of couched lances and a push of pikemen, Richemont's men break into the English lines. Seeing Richemont's banners, Clermont's French forces also surge forward again from the front. The English, now attacked from two sides, cannot regroup. The lines that held at Agincourt unravel at Formigny. Archers, already disrupted by cannon fire, are ridden down or flee. Surrounded and outnumbered, the English army collapses. Many are cut down trying to escape. Others throw down their weapons and beg for quarter. The Battle of Formigny ends in a decisive French victory. One chronicler calls it the greatest English defeat in France since the Battle of Bannockburn, a nod to how rare it was for the English to be so comprehensively beaten. Importantly, both aspects of France's military transformation contributed: artillery to unnerve and weaken the enemy, and professional cavalry under unified command to deliver the crushing blow. In the aftermath, the surviving fragments of English resistance in Normandy crumble quickly. The fortress of Caen, site of earlier brutal fighting in the war, capitulates to the French later in 1450. Cherbourg, the last coastal holdout where the English flag flies, endures a siege until August 1450, when it too surrenders, French cannons having reduced its defences and any hope of relief gone after Formigny. By the end of 1450, for the first time in decades, all of Normandy is back under French rule. The people of Normandy, who had lived under English law for a generation, are absorbed back into the Kingdom of France. The French royal administration moves in to re-establish control, and Charles VII appoints governors and officers to secure the peace. The speed and totality of the reconquest astonish observers on both sides. What began as an offensive in 1449 has, in barely a year and a half, wiped away what Henry V and his son had held for years. Normandy, which Henry V envisaged as a permanent English possession, is lost to the English crown, largely due to the newfound prowess of the French military machine. The final victory in Gascony, 1451 to 1453. With Normandy recovered, only one major region remains under English control: Gascony, in the southwest of France. Gascony, centering on Bordeaux and the Garonne Valley, has a long history under English rule. Since the 12th century it was held by England's kings, and its wine trade and local lords remained loyal to the Plantagenets. Even during France's lowest ebbs, Gascony stood as a distant but important asset for England. Now, in the early 1450s, Charles VII turns the attention of his revitalized army to this last redoubt. In 1451, French forces march southwards into Gascony. The campaign is led by experienced commanders, such as Jean Bureau, now not only master of artillery, but also serving as a sort of military governor, and the Count of Dunois, the bastard of Orléans, among others. The French strategy combines diplomacy and force. Some Gascon nobles are enticed to switch sides or at least not resist, while stubborn English garrisons are given the cannon treatment. Town after town in the region is retaken. Bordeaux, the jewel of Gascony, is approached with caution. It is well fortified, and the citizens have deep ties to England. Their wine export economy thrives on English partnership. But after some negotiation, and a show of overwhelming French force just outside its walls, Bordeaux opens its gates to Charles's representatives in June 1451. The English garrison evacuates, and a contingent of French troops moves in. The people of Bordeaux are promised rights and a degree of autonomy to soften the blow of changing allegiance. Along with Bordeaux, other key strongholds like Bayonne and Dax submit by the end of 1451. It appears that Gascony too has been finally restored to France's kingdom, and many herald 1451 as effectively the end of the war. To consolidate, King Charles appoints Jean Bureau as mayor of Bordeaux to administer the city and ensure loyalty. However, the conflict has one final act. The abrupt change of rule in Gascony leaves some of the populace dissatisfied. Gascons have enjoyed English patronage for centuries. Many local lords feel more affinity to London than Paris. There are economic concerns too. Will the French impose heavier taxes on wine exports? Over the winter of 1451 to 52, discontent simmers. Across the Channel, King Henry VI's government, though weak and plagued by internal strife, sees an opportunity to claw back something. In October 1452, the veteran English commander John Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury, lands in Gascony with a small but determined force of roughly 3,000 men. Talbot is a legendary figure, a hardy warrior in his 70s, known for previous exploits in the war. His arrival sparks a local uprising. Many Gascon lords rally to him, and the city of Bordeaux, missing the English connection, welcomes Talbot back in. Once more, the banner of St. George flies over Bordeaux, and English rule is temporarily restored in parts of Gascony. For the English, it feels like a glimmer of hope, proof that not all of France is firmly under Charles VII's grasp. Charles VII, however, is not the indecisive youth of old. He reacts swiftly and forcefully to the Gascon revolt. In the spring of 1453, he dispatches a powerful French army southwards to deal with Talbot and retake Gascony for good. This army is one of the most formidable France has ever assembled. It includes contingents of the Compagnies d'Ordonnance heavy cavalry, thousands of Frank archer infantry, and a massive artillery train led by Jean Bureau. By mid-July 1453, the French lay siege to Castillon, a small town east of Bordeaux where Talbot's forces have concentrated. The French establish a fortified camp outside Castillon, complete with earthen ramparts and ditches. Inside this camp, Jean Bureau positions as many as 300 cannons of various calibers, an enormous artillery park that demonstrates how far French gunnery has come. The guns are arranged to cover all approaches, and trenches and caltrops protect them from sudden cavalry charges. On July 17, 1453, John Talbot resolves to attack the French camp at Castillon, hoping to break the siege before it fully tightens. Accounts suggest Talbot is misinformed that the French are beginning to withdraw, so he advances rapidly with his troops in the early morning. Perhaps recalling the bold tactics of his youth and of Henry V's day, Talbot chooses a direct assault. Leading his knights and archers, he charges toward the French positions, catching a portion of the French outlying forces by surprise and routing them. Buoyed by this initial success, Talbot presses on toward the main camp. As the English draw near the French earthworks, hell suddenly erupts. The concealed French artillery opens fire in unison. Cannons belch smoke and flame, disgorging salvos of iron cannonballs and deadly grape-shot, canisters filled with small projectiles. The effect is devastating. English soldiers at the front ranks are blown apart or mown down. Gaps rip open in the English lines under the withering bombardment. Horses tumble, screaming, as artillery rounds tear through them, throwing knights to the ground. Talbot, gallant on his horse, urges his men forward into the teeth of this storm, but it is like charging into the maw of a dragon. The French cannons are expertly served. As some gunners reload the larger bombards to target distant formations, others swivel smaller culverins and ribaudequins to fire volleys of iron shrapnel at closer targets. English archers attempt to return fire with their longbows, but arrows cannot suppress cannon crews behind defensive works. Amid the carnage, John Talbot's own fate is sealed. A cannonball strikes his position. One account says his horse is hit and collapses, crushing Talbot beneath it. The old warrior, his leg broken and chest pinned, is immobile as the barrage continues. English troops briefly penetrate part of the French camp, only to find themselves confronted not only by artillery, but by fresh French reserves, including a contingent of Richemont's gendarmes and Gascon French archers hidden in nearby woods. Bureau had wisely stationed infantry to guard the flanks. These French troops counterattack ferociously. The English, decimated and unable to even reach the enemy guns, begin to waver and then retreat in panic. What started as an assault becomes a massacre. When the smoke settles by midday, the once proud English force is effectively annihilated. Thousands lie dead or wounded. Among them, the great John Talbot himself, who perishes on the field of Castillon. His son, joining him in the charge, also falls. The English army in Gascony is fatally broken. The Battle of Castillon is often considered one of the first truly modern battles. Artillery was the decisive factor, and the French victory was nearly total. In the aftermath, the few surviving English units in the region hastened to retreat or surrender. Bordeaux, bereft of hope and now surrounded by victorious French forces, surrenders again in October 1453. This time, the terms are less lenient. Charles VII ensures a tighter grasp to prevent any future treachery. With Bordeaux's fall, Gascony is fully reunited with France. There are no more English armies left on French soil, nor any ally to aid them. The 100 Years' War, though not yet officially declared over by any treaty, has effectively reached its end. Triumph and transformation, war's end and legacy. The year 1453 thus marks a stunning reversal of fortune. Less than 40 years earlier, France had suffered the ignominy of Agincourt. Its king had been forced to accept a foreign heir, and its lands were overrun. Now, France stands victorious, free of the invader, except for one token toehold, the port of Calais, which the English still hold, but which poses no significant threat. King Charles VII, once mocked as the Little King of Bourges, has earned a new sobriquet among his people, Charles le Victorieux, Charles the Victorious. The transformation of the French military was at the heart of this triumph. From a disorganized feudal levy, prone to rash tactics and internal strife, it evolved into Europe's most effective fighting force of the late Middle Ages. The change was not magical or sudden. It was the result of a series of deliberate reforms and hard lessons learned in blood. The French had learned to appreciate the value of common soldiers, the stout foot archer and pikeman, alongside the knight. They had forged a professional corps of men-at-arms who owed loyalty to the crown, above all, prefiguring the national armies of the future. They had harnessed new technology, mastering gunpowder artillery and integrating it into their strategies, achieving what their enemies could not: decisive artillery superiority. Leadership, too, had matured. Figures like Arthur de Richemont enforced discipline and unity of command that had been sorely lacking. King Charles VII himself deserves credit. He showed the foresight to empower capable ministers and generals, to finance the army properly, and to stay the course with reforms, even when they met resistance. Under his calm but determined guidance, what had been a fractured kingdom became a centralized state capable of mobilizing its resources for war effectively. On the tactical level, French armies in 1453 fought very differently from those in 1415. They understood when to avoid pitched battle. For instance, Charles VII often preferred sieges or maneuver to risky open battles, unless on favourable terms. But when battle was joined, they coordinated archers, cavalry and artillery to maximum effect. At Formigny, it was the combination of cannon fire and a well-timed cavalry assault that delivered victory. At Castillon, it was the synergistic use of field fortifications, massed artillery and supporting infantry that obliterated the attacking enemy. These are hallmarks of a military transformed, no longer relying purely on knightly valour or numerical superiority, but on planning, technology and cohesion. In essence, France had innovated itself out of the age of chivalry and into a new era of organised warfare. The 100 Years' War formally sputters out after 1453. No peace treaty is signed immediately. England, soon to be embroiled in civil wars of its own, the Wars of the Roses, simply cannot continue the fight. A de facto peace descends. The populace of France, having endured generations of conflict, slowly rebuilds. Fields are tilled again, towns are repopulated. The military reforms instituted by Charles VII leave a lasting legacy. His standing companies of ordnance are maintained and even improved by his successors. They represent the first instance since Roman times of a standing professional army in Western Europe, and other nations will take note and imitate aspects in the decades to come. The emphasis on artillery persists as well. By the time of Charles's son, Louis XI, and later French kings, France will be renowned for its skilled gunners and powerful cannons, dominating battlefields into the 16th century. As France celebrates its victory, one cannot help but reflect on the journey from Agincourt to Castillon. At Agincourt, French knights fought with reckless bravery but without strategy, and they fell in the mud to arrows and swords. By Castillon, French common gunners and archers, directed by wise leaders, felled the might of England with iron cannonballs and disciplined force. It is a story of adaptation and resilience. France's defeat in 1415 was as devastating as any nation could suffer, yet within a generation, the French turned that defeat into motivation to reform and rebuild. Key individuals played crucial roles: the unwavering leadership of Charles VII, the stern guidance of Richemont in professionalizing the army, the divine spark provided by Joan of Arc to rekindle French spirit, and the ingenuity of the Bureau brothers in giving France the artillery edge. Each contributed to the broader transformation. In the end, France emerged from the 100 Years' War not humbled, but strengthened. The feudal host that once charged blindly at Agincourt had evolved into a disciplined, modernized army, arguably the most formidable in late medieval Europe. This military renaissance not only expelled the invaders, but also helped forge a stronger French state. A sense of national unity, kindled by Joan and cemented by victory, began to take root among the French people. When the war officially winds down, Charles VII can rightfully bask in the achievement. His realm is intact and his army is now the gold standard of the age. As the dust of the long conflict settles, a new chapter begins. The Middle Ages inch toward the Renaissance, and the nature of warfare has changed forever. Knights in heavy armour will soon yield primacy to gunpowder and professional soldiery. France's rebuilt military stands as the harbinger of that future. From the depths of defeat at Agincourt to the heights of triumph at Castillon, France's journey demonstrates how even the most catastrophic loss can be the catalyst for reform, renewal, and ultimate victory.